Is art objective? Yes. The end.
No!
I think we need to define art in order to make this video understandable, because we can't start from different islands of thought. I can't give you terms if you don't agree with them, and since art will be the main term of this video, then I guess we need to define art. Now this definition is pretty problematic, so let's correct it, shall we? So art versus design, I struggled with this for a while because I'm a designer, but I was heavily introduced to art during my education. So what is the difference? Considering that it is a timeless debate, there are a lot of opinions on the matter. I never found any of the points made to be useful because, well, let's look at them. Design always needs functionality, while art only has to exist. Existence is functionality. How do you decide functionality anyway? Is a knife less of a design than a Swiss Army knife? Does it depend on the quality? Also, does that make a piece of design that no one uses, like an antique car, art? What decides the shift from design to art? Also, art can be quite functional. Instruments, for example, are glorified sculptures. Art in their own right, made hundreds of years ago, yet they have functionality. Are they designs? Another thing that tells us that there might be a difference is that design is priced with its functionality and art is priced up to the highest bidder. Again, bidding can and has been done for pieces of design for years. Another distinction, art is unique but design is replicatable. Art loses its value when it can be replicated. Again, what do you call art prints? Are they designs or are they art? What about copy paintings? Even when done great, does that make the original painting lose value? And if a piece of design is discontinued, does it become art because of its rarity? Design focuses on rationality, while art focuses on perception. Again, art is very rational when it needs to be, very straightforward, very realistic, and design can be very abstract and very perceptive based. Well, all of that proves that the debate has been going on since forever because, well, any definition that was made to fit one can be applied to the other. So where does that put us? Well, if you were to ask me, back in the day, what my art versus design thoughts are, I would have said that design conveys information while art conveys skill and or a message. Now, I realize the different reasons why that distinction is false. So what is the difference between art and design? The words are very much interchangeable. There is no difference. There has never been a difference. Design and art are the same thing. Now that being said, I will use the word art for the rest of the video because it's just one syllable. So natural art. Art that is created without human intervention beyond at most giving tools to the creator. When art is created naturally, whether through erosion or through mitosis, it is hard to describe it as art since, well, humans didn't make that. The rain fell for a few years and now we have this thing. I laid some pipe and now I have that thing. Well, consider this. Time and time again, creatures that we observed either in the wild or in captivity have been able to create art, whether through instruction, through random chance, or through instinct. In those cases, the creatures knowingly or not are artists. The artist's intentions are not required for art to be art, neither is the creature's opinion on itself as an artist or not. An artist's work can be appreciated regardless if the art was meant to be observed as such. Random tangent, by the way, I spent 5 hours working on this on my wall. Comment down below if you like it. Ha! Fooled you! This is not my creation! You know who created this? A random object. It's not even my wall. Now here's my question to you. Is this less of an art piece if it were created by a living being or by a random chance of something bumping into a wall? If the person who lived there moved out and never had seen it, and then someone else moved in and marveled at it, would it then be art? Is art dependent on the observer? Is the Grand Canyon still art if it was never seen? Here's a clearer example. Are icicles in the Arctic less of an art piece compared to the icicles on your roof because you never saw them? You know those icicles that people take photos of for Instagram and like, ooh, winter is coming. Yeah. I say that art is not dependent on the observer. Tree falling down and all that. Here we are faced by another problem. Is a sneeze onto a wall with snot going down it art? Are the speckles of shit on the side of a toilet bowl in a public bathroom art? Well, yes. They have to be. Now, does that mean that that art deserves the respect and adoration that other artists receive for their work? Ha! I've just discovered a fallacy that you obviously are guilty of. The word art comes with a certain connotation. It's a loaded term. Art, put plainly, is not something that deserves anything. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder and all that stuff. And thus, whether a laptop is more useful than a shit-stained pair of tighty-whities, it doesn't change the reality. Both are art. Whether or not one is valued over the other is not the point. Now, with all that in mind, I will come up with a definition of the word art that is actually correct, compared to the stupid definitions from the dictionary. What is art? Art is anything we see, hear, feel, write, conceptualize, and have never conceptualized. That's quite the broadening of the horizons. Alright, I think I'm done with the philosophy part of this video. Let's talk about the actual reason you are here. How is art objectively understood? Put simply, is art objective? Well, let's look historically. My overall experience with art is visual. Now, I've been educated in modern art. What we learned there is that the art is very objectively defined by the same artsy-fartsy educators that bred you.
Why does it feel like I'm taking crazy pills? 'Cause it really feels like I'm taking crazy pills. Here's the thing, art is subjective.
All film is subjective. All art is subjective.
Art is subjective.
Art is not a science. There is no means to universally or factually prove worth. And arguably that is why art has any value in the first place.
Now, what do I mean by art is objective? Considering that the overall opinion to art that people have these days is
modern art is fucking garbage.
Well, to start, let's take a short trip to the Industrial Revolution. Up until the 1800s, art was what we all understood to be classical art. Now, that is not a correct description, but what matters to us is the last movement that started the modern art craze that led to the art that is despised today. Now, don't worry about what an art movement means. The best way to explain it is think of it as a category of what that art fits. Neoclassicism, when it comes to painting, is defined by a slight stylistic change when it comes to the composition of those paintings. Generally speaking, the art is visually identified by having darker backgrounds of architecture with an opening in them to showcase the outside world. It also was defined by the clarity of form, sober clothing, shallow space, strong vertical and horizontals, and shallow emotion on the faces of their subjects. Now, at the time, art was a lot more stringent. That is not to say people couldn't create art freely, but rather people who created art that did not follow the Académie Royale de Peinture et de Sculpture's rules were not recognized as actual artists. There's a lot more history to cover if we are to get full context on that, but fuck you! Too long. At the time, true art had to fit a stringent criteria. Artists could paint only 5 subject matters that could be viewed in the gallery. Historical, either biblical, mythological, or real history, landscapes, portraits, still lives, and genre paintings, which depict everyday activities that people do. The highest prestige paintings a painter could paint would be historical paintings, and young artists were expected to add to the legacy of art by creating some new technique of some sort. Also, women were not usually allowed, but there were some female artists that came out of that era. Now, when it comes to modern art, Romanticism is where things start shifting heavily. Artists went outside in order to study landscapes and found that painting in plein air was a lot more fun and satisfying. These artists applied their neoclassical education into painting nature. The artists that moved to Romanticism opened the Barbizon school. Their art was seen as lazy by the Academy. Starting to see a pattern?
Modern art is fucking garbage.
Now, considering how impactful the Industrial Revolution was, people overall were looking towards knowledge and science instead of religion and superstition. At that time. Artistically, that birthed realism. Realism is literally what the name is. Show people doing shit. But instead of being some holier than thou person eating something, we start seeing normal people doing some normal stuff. That was abhorrent to the Academy.
Garbage.
The biggest artist that pioneered realism is Gustave Courbet, and his paintings were hated by the old art community, especially considering the size of these paintings, sizes that were reserved to historical and biblical paintings. Courbet was very successful though, so successful that he built a pavilion in front of the Academy after having some of his paintings rejected by that Academy. He also wrote a realist manifesto, a first at the time. Now, I'll have to speed up because we're gonna be here forever if I keep going. From then on, art movements were plenty to come. Every time an artist wanted to advance something, they'd create an art movement and call it something. Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Neo-Impressionism, Pointillism, Divisionism, Symbolism, Fauvism, Expressionism, Cubism, Futurism, Style, Suprematism, Minimalism, Dada, Percussionism, Surrealism, Art Deco, Ready-Made, Pop Art. Did you notice something? Do I have to repeat the list? Here! Did you notice something there? I implore you, dear viewer. How can we have a list of art movements if we can't objectively define art? What makes this painting different than this painting? Well, for one, this painting focuses on strong colors and ignores anatomical accuracy in order to convey energy and movements. It refrained from hiding brushstrokes and embraced the painterly qualities that it would come from it. As opposed to this one, which focuses on painting its subject from different points of view and time, combining all these points of view. In addition, the images are flattened and given very geometric shapes as opposed to the organic feel of the last painting. Lack of chiaroscuro, in addition to a monochromatic color choice. So, did you think these art pieces were as contrasting as I have just described them? The approaches in these examples, when defined the way I did, objectively, leads us to assume that these paintings represent very opposing and contrasting art movements and approaches. Now, do these definitions make any value judgments on these two paintings? No. You can decide for yourself which one is better, subjectively. That's not up to me. Objectively, however, nothing about these two paintings is alike. Other than the subject matter, kind of. One is savages dancing and the other is ugly prostitutes. Picasso was a cunt. But Japes, you ask me, this is for paintings. How does that apply to movies and games and the like? Well, dear viewer, if art historically up till now has been able to be defined by its moving parts, then why, oh why, can you not apply the same regulations on art that is not paintings? You don't have to use the same terms, but if a movie can be defined by at least one term that is seen consistently in several of its iterations, then man oh man, we have what is functionally an art movement. Why can't we define some movies as superhero movies? Well, duh, there are superheroes in them. Oh, wait a second, did you just make an objective claim that can be applied to all movies that fit that criteria? Wow. In order to make this clear, let's look at my man Seurat and his painting Un dimanche après-midi à l'île de la Grande Jatte. This painting applies a technique called Pointillism. Pointillism is where an artist, instead of mixing colors to create shades, combines a bunch of colors as dots in a small area in order to, at a distance, convey form. Kinda like printers. Is that subjective or objective? Okay, so with that in mind, is that a Pointillism painting? No? Why not? Oh, because the painter did not bother dotting every single inch of a 200 by 300 centimeter canvas like a lunatic? Right, so objectively this is not a Pointillism painting. Cool. So when a movie has no superheroes, can you call it a superhero movie? Cool, we can't. It's something else completely. Alright, now, is it fair to extend that requirement to characters? Well, see this portrait? It's a portrait of Abraham Lincoln. No? Oh. Because objectively it's a portrait of Henry VIII? Okay, you got me. So, does that mean when a character in a movie is established to be heroic and noble, objectively through their actions and their worldview, but then go on to do something that completely contradicts that development, does that mean that that is an objective flaw? Is character not as tangible as a person's look? I'd say so, because although one is visible and permanent on a movie screen, usually, the other affects the movie's events. So understanding that a movie's or a game's characters, story, events, and timeline need to function similarly to reality in order to create a feasible and realistic view of the world is paramount. Most of the popular movies these days showcase reality, with a twist. Whether that twist be supernatural, or a big event, or a futuristic one, we all understand these worlds relatively to the world that we live in right now. So, when things are defined to us correctly, whether through narration, visual examples, or so on, we add those as a reference in order to make sure we understand that world. Everything that isn't explained is filled by us, the audience. What that could lead to, when done poorly, is the entire destruction of the world. Like, for example, all we know is that the offerings are given by relatives that are declared at a border of sorts, and they are not overflowing the land of the dead. Also, people with more offerings are richer somehow in a world that is supposedly for all the dead to enjoy. All I can assume is that the offerings are bought up by the land of the dead government because people with no offerings live in squalor, while the people with offerings are living it up and enjoying life. A worse version of that is when rules are given to us but then contradicted for some payoff. The Death Note takes real and full names only while picturing the face of the person, but we need a payoff, so write down Watari and don't worry about that. Also, only people's names that are on the Death Note can be killed, but somehow you can control people to kill others by them using the Death Note? That doesn't make any sense. Fucks the rules. Now, why do realistic and understandable scenarios only work when trying to make us believe the world that we're watching? Well, if you can bullshit the reason why something happens in order to lead us to a payoff, then what stops you from doing it for every part of the story? The knife disappears. Well, I will not be employing some meta bullshit in order to save the movie. I will take you seriously and think that every element that you include in every frame is completely on purpose and necessary to convey your message. What that scene tells me is that either the Force has the power to remove weapons in order to save a person, or that Rey specifically has that power. Now we know that no one else showcases that powers, only in the case of Rey, so I guess it's a personal power. But why does that power not apply every other time it could have saved her? Well, maybe she doesn't have that power, but well, because maybe Snoke's room is made of extra Force juice, or so her powers are bumped to 11. But she never uses the Force in that fight scene. But maybe she doesn't know she had that power, but she still uses it here somehow. Maybe it's not the Force. And that, movie watchers, is what we call a failure to make a movie make sense, because the writer-director can't write nor direct.